Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. On today's episode, I am extremely excited to welcome Victoria Thomas, who is the CFO and co-owner of Kellymoss. And as we get into this description, forgive me for kind of geeking out. I'm so excited to have Victoria on. But at Kellymoss, Victoria manages the fiscal end of a team producing over 100 podiums and 4 national championships in 2022 alone. She also oversees the company's vision and brand strategy. With a managerial accounting background, Victoria's focus has always been on healthy growth, and that is shown through Kellymoss as it has grown over 400% in her tenure. Victoria is passionate about increasing awareness around the opportunities for women in motorsports and is thrilled to be in a position to bring more female drivers, engineers, and technicians into the industry. Now, this is just a really, really short version of who Victoria is, and I'm sure we're going to learn a lot about her today, but just really, really excited to have you today, Victoria. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic, Jay. Thank you so much for having me and giving an opportunity to share a little bit about our story.
It is an absolute pleasure to have you on. As I mentioned at the top, I'm definitely a huge fan of everything that you do, and it's crazy to me that you guys are based out of Madison, Wisconsin, right? Like it is such a mind-blowing thing that you have this juggernaut of a team operating in the Midwest and it really in our backyard. So I want to learn about your story. I think your story in general is very fascinating because it really wasn't a racing background that led you to where you're at today. So how did things start? Like what happened to get you in the position that you are today?
It is probably one of the more unusual ways to step into motorsports. If you met me now, I am insanely passionate about what we do, but I have an accounting background and I was actually just hired by the corporation to come in and help them determine the profitability of each of the divisions of the company. So at the time that I was hired, they had one checking account and they were not sure if the body shop was bringing in 300,000 and the race shop was losing 200,000 or how it all mapped out. And were smart enough to be able to figure out they should probably have a deeper understanding of each of the areas of their business and how successful they were. So I was brought in as an independent consultant into the company, and that's how I landed here originally, was as a consultant.
And you are actually
So the
from,
kind of
oh, I'm sorry about that, Victoria, but you're actually from this area, right?
Yes, absolutely. So I had a small accounting firm that was located in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, and I hired and I had 5 women that worked for me that were working from home. The mission of my company was to provide CFO level information to small businesses, helping them understand their financial statements, use that scorecard of their business to be able to make sound financial decisions with regard to cash flow, investments, minimization of taxation, and growing profitability. All the super fun, sexy stuff, right? Everybody loves accounting. so, so for me, just coming in as a consultant, one of the first conversations I had with the owners is, are you aware of the fact that your lowest paid technician is your highest producing technician? And for them, coming from a racing background where the entire point of focus is getting cars successfully on track and paperwork typically not something that any of the staff here had any tolerance for whatsoever, they were absolutely shocked that I could have that type of information and offered me a position. And after 7 job offers, I did end up selling my book of business and coming on board full time.
I, when did you know that it was like something that you were going to be passionate about? I mean, is it something coming from a non-racing background and into it? Was it right away, like, or did it take time to understand the racing culture and everything that goes into it?
That's a great question. I was passionate out of the gate, but it had nothing to do with anything automotive. The ability to step into a company that had an incredible pedigree that they were not capitalizing on, um, and and be able to make these small steps that made enormous gains for them financially was so rewarding for me. So I had an open slate to do anything that I wanted as long as they were seeing forward momentum in terms of fiscally. So it was so much fun for me to dig in and start to make these tweaks to make them more successful. So I fell in love with that out of the gate. That was incredibly rewarding. It took a while before I had the fiscal situation sound enough that I could really take a breath and start to look at what they were doing when everybody left the shop and they went on to track. And actually, my initial reaction was, I can't be involved in watching this. Now I know who the drivers are. They go out on track and they crash at 160 miles an hour. I can't watch that. And I actually had, at one point, I was watching TV on a Saturday. We were racing and one of our drivers hit a wall and flipped 7 times. And I shut off the TV and I sent a text message to our data engineer and said, I'm done. I'm out. I'm never watching again. And he said, let me send you the in-car video. And the guy flipped over 7 times and you see him, the car pause and he pops open the door and he hops out. And it looked like a fender bender on the belt line, right? You could see him boom, 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 and pops the door and hops out. And so I started to really be impressed with the brand of Porsche. But ultimately my love was most developed by the fact that these cars, Porsche is so exceptional with their supply and demand, that these cars year over year over year grow in value. So you can have this car that's super fun to drive, that's in your investment portfolio, gaining 10 to 25% year over year over year. They're not making more of those cars. You can't
Right.
go back in time and make more. So every year the value goes up. And so it was still kind of the fiscal side of me that fell in love with it. And now you can't keep me away from the track. I love everything about what we do. So it was a slow burn.
It's so interesting to hear that part of the story, and I give you so much credit for giving watching it another chance, right? And I think that being able to, once you develop relationships with the drivers and the whole team, right? There's so many different facets to racing, and I think the relational aspect of racing is kind of underrated, just because there are so many great solid relationships and good people, I think for the most part. But it is, I think, one of those things where once you get in, you just kind of, it doesn't let go of you.
There is something that is very addictive about racing. And at our level of racing, for me, my first thought was it's sort of this rich man sport, right? And it's a way to kind of show off that you have enough money to do this thing. That was my first impression. Is absolutely not my impression now. For me, in having conversation with our drivers, what I have learned is there's a particular personality type that is successful in business. And what leads to that success in business leads to a problem of not ever being able to shut your brain off. And what I've learned is that our drivers are obsessed with the time on track because your subconscious is kind enough to say, listen up, when we're going 160 miles an hour on the track, you will think of nothing else. And their ability to be zen and in flow and focused when they're on track and not be thinking about whatever's happening with their business or, their charities or whatever else is happening in their life that they can't shut off in other situations, they absolutely shut off on the track. And that's the part that seems a little bit addictive.
Yeah, I that's such a good point. I mean, you're forced to not think about anything else, and at some level, that's just a different level of clarity and makes you focus and makes you, like any athlete, right? You're focused on the task, and if it's lap times and making sure that you're running consistent laps and that you're doing things the way that you should, while there's a bunch of chaos going around you, I mean, that is a very, very significant challenge.
It is. And it's also something that, for certain, that degree of managing your mind can be translated into business and into your personal life in a lot of different ways. So I understand the addiction and I appreciate it. I don't share it, but I understand and appreciate it.
For a limited time only, you can invite technicians, service advisors, students, and other industry friends to create a free individual account on WrenchWay and earn free t-shirts. The 3 t-shirts up for grabs include popular industry sayings like, "Waiter's gonna wait," "Make mechanics cool again," and "Fix what others can't." Here's how it works. Retrieve your referral code by logging into your WrenchWay account and going to your profile. Don't worry if you don't already have a WrenchWay account, you can create one for free. Then share your code with your friends. Make sure those you refer enter in your referral code when they create their free WrenchWay account. The more people you refer, the more t-shirts you can win. This is a limited time offer that is valid through May 31st, 2023. So don't miss your chance. Click the link in the show notes to get started.
Have you gotten in one of the cars, whether it's like with one of your professional drivers, and been able to experience that side of it?
I have. So for me, just to backtrack a little bit, because one of the things that Kellymoss didn't do well when I came on board was they didn't tell their story. So there wasn't a website, there wasn't a social media presence. We had been running race cars since 1988. In this moment in time, we are the winningest race team in Porsche history.
Wow.
We're told, and I have not researched that this year, but did last year, that we're the largest race team in North America by car count. And we're also the largest customer of Porsche Motorsports in the world. So there was a lot of success, and a lot of that has happened since my time, but there was an incredible amount of success that happened before that. And there was no way to share that with people. So for me, my job in this company is to let the world know who we are and what we're doing. And I felt like in order to do that, there had to be an element of authenticity in, I had to at least get in one of these cars. So we run, we call our drivers that are in contention for championships elite drivers. So those are they're often referred to young guns. Those are the kids that their intention is to make their career as race car drivers. And we are a training ground for many, many, many of them. As a matter of fact, we have more championships than anyone's ever had. So we're a solid training ground for them. But to subsidize that, we have what has previously been referred to as gentleman drivers, which are people that make their living another way. For example, they're very successful business owners, and this is where they come to play. And we also train them. It's just their ambition is not to leave their job and have a career in racing. So one of the gentleman drivers came to me and said, "I understand that you've never been on track. I'm going to take you for a hot lap." And Andrew Davis, bless his heart, who's one of our pro driver coaches, Andrew Davis came up and put his arm around me and he said, "Under no circumstances are you getting in a car with an amateur driver and doing a hot lap. If you want to go on a hot lap, go with me." And he described the conditions of the hot lap and said, first of all, just look inside these cars. You're not going to find any creature comforts whatsoever. And I think people are kind of shocked when they see what the inside of a $350,000 race car is. It looks like somebody stripped everything out of it. So he told me about the conditions, and then he expressed to me what I would experience. And I said, I'm going to take a pass. I have no interest in doing that. But eventually, as I became more and more the spokesperson for the company, in particular with women in motorsports, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that. And actually, Andrew took me out for a hot lap. I wouldn't say that I loved it. I enjoyed it more than I thought, but I kind of feel like it's like, how vacations are sort of better in retrospect? Like once
Yes.
You're on the far side of them and not dealing with the stress, you remember all the good. And while it's actually happening, it's actually not that fantastic. that's kind of the way I feel about the hot lap. Like now that I'm on the far side of it and I know that I think about it positively, I can't say that I defined it as a positive experience in the moment.
That is the best way I've ever heard that explained. And I I always say, like, I think you're uncomfortable if somebody else is driving regardless. Like, at least I
Yes.
am, you know, like even if I'm in a passenger car with my wife, I'm definitely the backseat driver. And not that you're trying to tell the professional driver what to do. It's more, you just don't have control. Right. And I think
Yeah.
that is such a hard thing to come to grips with.
Yeah. Yeah. You feel very helpless and also are incredibly cognizant of the fact that if they mess up, you could die. It's an uncomfortable combination.
All right. Well,
But
let
I can say I done it.
Oh, that is so cool. Well, let's talk about the company a little bit more, and then we'll talk about we're going to talk about some mindset stuff because I
Yeah.
had such a enjoyable conversation with you prior to this in talking about the importance of mindset. But I think to help set the stage, we need to talk about the company and maybe some of the growth that you went through and maybe some of the growth that was unexpected, right? Like just being able to start with the story of Kellymoss, I think is so important because
Yeah.
the growth didn't happen really in maybe I hesitate to say an organic way because it really did, but like it was just a kind of a different story. So why don't you walk us through that and talk to us a
Sure.
little bit about Kellymoss as a whole?
You bet. So Kellymoss was founded in 1988 with the type of backstory that a lot of your friends probably have in terms of racing, whereas as opposed to kind of what you think of as the corporate brand now, it was really two guys that got together and said, "Hey, I want to write off my racing," and the name is an amalgamation of their last names. And they started this originally. Cars were being imported from Europe, and in order to run on the tracks in the U.S., there were some adjustments that had to happen to the cars. That was sort of the roots of the company, was getting the cars track ready for the United States. Definitely a Porsche focus on Porsche, even back in 1988. So they had some success. They started racing because that was the fun that they wanted to do. The company was acquired by Jeff and David Stone, which were two brothers that were from Florida that were part of that crew that would help the cars get track ready, but really developed a relationship with Porsche in getting these cars ready and working together, and eventually did some driving and had some really quality success on the track. But even when I came on board, 12 or 13 years ago, the business model was more, they'd run, 4 or 5 cars a year. In essence, what would happen is the shop would shut down, the cars would go out to the racetrack, they'd run, they'd ultimately get some damage, they'd come back and get re-prepped, and then the shop would shut down again and we go back to the racetrack. So in the winter months or, during the off season, there would be a couple of project builds that would be done just to sustain revenue so that we could have full-time employees. But I think there were 9 full-time employees when I started on board and, maybe $2 million in revenue that was happening. For me, that was a very dangerous position for the company to be in. You have all the same type of drivers. And if something happened to the economy where they went away, there would be no way to sustain business. So the first point of focus was the growth into our project builds. Currently, we were running about 25 full-time professional series drivers, and then we have about 120 project builds that are going on in our shop at any time, and they range from 60,000 to 2.2 million in terms of the scope of the project. So a super different model right now.
Yeah, I
But
bet.
at the time, you've got the 9 drivers. So the focus was simply to highlight what we were doing, set up social media, be able to show more about the projects and try to draw in more of the project builds. So there was some diversity. One of the major hiccups that we had is David Stone, who was one of the founders, actually passed away from cancer. And Jeff was left gutted with a company where the fiscal end was not his point of focus. His was, being out at the track and driver development and that type of thing. So he lost his brother, he lost his best friend, and was in a situation that was really difficult with the business. And then the next thing that happened was we had this big building that was, 80 some thousand square feet. Within the building, half of the space was occupied by one of our clients that was wealthy enough to want to not just be on the Kellymoss team, but develop his own team. So they had set up a totally separate entity, and that was Level 5 Motorsports. Well, their area of our shop was completely landlocked. So you'd have to come through our front door to get to their area. And we received a telephone call. Hi, this is CNN. Would you like to comment on the fact that Scott Tucker was just taken by gunpoint from his home and arrested? And Scott Tucker was the owner of Level 5 Motorsports. That was how we found out about it. I spent a great deal of time praying to God that the news crews in Madison didn't figure out that we were sharing the same building, because it was on the news every morning. I mean, it was a white collar theft thing. So he did online payday loan. And it was just a terrifying time in our history, because the federal government locked down his area of the business, meaning they sent us a court order that said, you're not allowed to touch the assets, you're not allowed to move the assets. And so we had to roll down the doors and separate off his stuff, but we still had to pay the rent and the utilities and the property taxes and everything on that area. We couldn't even sublet it. And what we quickly discovered is we'd never be able to sublet it. It's totally landlocked in our space. So we did a bunch of research about if we were going to move or what we were going to do with the business. Jeff's in a terrible emotional state. Andy Kilcoyne, who is the co-owner of Kellymoss now, he and I were trying to figure out how we were going to save the business, essentially. And after figuring out that it cost over $500,000 just to move the business, the physical relocation of the hoists and all of that, we just sat down one day and said, we can't afford to move it. We have no other option. We have to grow this business. And I will tell you that was probably the most profound moment in terms of what happened with our company fiscally. Everything changed at the moment we said, we have no choice. We have to grow this business. And I promise you it was less than 6 months and we had outgrown the space that we had by doubling our space. It was crazy.
And for those of you that aren't aware, you can watch the story of this, not directly related to Kellymoss, but it was directly related, but there's an episode of Dirty Money that kind of goes into great detail about it. And it is incredible that hindsight probably makes it look easier than it was, right? Because when you're in that moment and you're kind of having that huddle where you're talking about what the next steps are, that had to be terrifying.
It was. Fortunately, I was emotionally mature enough at that point in life to recognize that a victim mindset is no place that ever gains you anything. You can't, in the world, you cannot find me a monumentally successful human being that ever says, someone did something to me. It's not fair to me. This shouldn't have happened to me. So even though from our perspective, not fully understanding at all where Scott got his money or what he was doing or who he was out in the world in that way, he was a great guy to work with. He was a wonderful racer. He was a nice man. He gave a lot of money to charity. He did a lot of things. What we saw was very right. So not knowing that whole other side, feel, it would be really easy to say it's not fair that the government shut down this area of our business. It's not fair that we can't even sublet it. It's not fair that all of a sudden this has happened to us. But that's giving away all your power as soon as you have this victim mentality. So we really tried to figure out how to use that emotion to fuel how we go about being successful. But yeah, I mean, it was very scary, and empowering and exhilarating. And it's the type of thing where if you talk to someone that has to do something when the nerves kick in and you feel the anxiety and your blood pressure goes up and your heart starts pounding, you go, I'm scared, I'm scared, I'm scared. I don't want to do public speaking. Or I don't want to do this podcast. I'm scared. And you talk to an athlete and their blood pressure goes up and their heart starts to pound and they say, I'm excited, I'm energized, I'm enthused. It's the same thing. It's how you label it. So being able to take those situations and make them powerful for you instead of taking your power away is a tool that once you master, it really is like rocket fuel for you. So there was a lot of that happening too. Like, we get to paint our future. We get to decide where we go with this. We get to decide who we become. And it was an opportunity to write our history in the moment. And it was a fun time. Again, probably like the vacation. It was probably less fun when it was happening, but in retrospect, there were absolutely moments of exhilaration and joy. Yeah, we got to just take a blank slate and say, who are we going to be and what are we going to do with this?
I think so many people try to suppress those feelings rather than embrace them, right? So meaning you're trying to avoid situations that do that, but maybe this is just my mindset, but I almost feel like you're living a very boring life if that's if you're just kind of always at that even keel, nothing is really getting your blood flowing, right? Like it to me is such when you said it that way, in how you tag it and how you name what that feeling is, rather than trying to get rid of it, you embrace it, you're going to do some pretty incredible things.
Oh, 100%. And for me, an enormous part of that comes with reframing the word failure. There is none of your significant growth comes from success. Your growth all comes from failure. So even in those moments where you go, wow, this didn't go as planned, that's not the important moment. It's what you do with that moment. It's your growth. It's your resilience. It's your being able to believe in yourself. Like, no matter how bad this goes, no matter how terrible this goes, 100% I'm going to be okay. I have all of these skills and nobody can take that away from me. And I have the ability to think outside the box and nobody can take that away from me. And that comes from making mistakes and picking yourself back up. If you choose not to pick yourself back up, which is just your choice, if you choose that, then that's the only time that you don't get to have that learning moment and that self-confidence, and all of the good stuff comes from failing. And it's a training thing. When you feel that, like, for me, when I have those moments where, wow, something has gone really wrong, there's this almost physical inward, like you want to like back away from the world and not be visible and make yourself small. When I feel my shoulders come in like that, I go, ooh, this is a moment, and I genuinely, my immediate reaction to my physical subconscious response is to go, here you go. This is where you get better.
Wow. So you use that as a trigger point to say, hey, I need to shift something here. I love that.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So were you naturally blessed with this positive mindset, or was this something that you had to shift and adapt to or grow with? And I love the fact that you said, you made the point about emotional maturity. And I think there's so much importance in that, and something that I found in myself as well, where it takes time. I think, even when I was in, like, say, my early 20s, they'll say, some older folks used to tell me, you don't know. And at early 20s, you think you know everything. And until you go through it, it's really hard to understand that those experiences are what lead to growth, and that emotional maturity is kind of going along with that, and learning that, not everything is catastrophic. Like, just take a step back, take a breath, and everything's going to be fine. You just have to kind of maybe work a little harder or do something a little different. But I'm curious if that's something that you've carried along with you over the course of your life, or if that's something you've had to work on.
Well, I think an enormous part of it comes from I came from a very, very fundamentally entrepreneurial family. My parents were and are farmers, which is, first generation farmers, I should add. So, the choice to work 24/7, 365, and do this thing where you get paid almost no money and you work your butt off, was a conscious choice for them. But in addition, my grandfather was an architect, and he eventually started a solar company. And so from the beginning, for me, I think that I was raised around this mindset that you can do anything. For sure, my parents instilled in me that, like, the sky's the limit. Whatever you decide you want to do, you can do anything. And also, I think I never had a sense that things not going to my specific plan meant that I was a failure. Really early on, I had a very strong disconnect with what most people view failure as. For example, my very first business, I was going to college, and I got myself into a position where I was working full time and going to college at night. And I was exhausted, and I was taking out these huge student loans. And I was like, oh my gosh, these student loans are getting so big. What am I going to do? And I can't quit school, or I have to start paying back my student loans. And so I was in a position where, again, backed into a corner with regard to what I was going to do about all this debt that I was taking on. I went to the library, did a whole bunch of research, and found myself a grant. Ended up getting a grant. I had a full ride scholarship for my last 2 years. And I said, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to start a business doing this for people. This is a wonderful thing to do for people. Like business plans, people, I got to tell you, make your mistakes on paper. My target audience was somebody that had no money, for one. And it took whatever, 60 hours to come up with these grants to give somebody. First of all, they never pay you. And it took an insane amount of time to actually produce. It was a horrible idea. But when I walked away from that, you could say the business was called Scholar Connections. I had a little office on Monona Drive. I was 18 years old. I had a little office on Monona Drive. You could say I closed that business after, a year and a half or 2 years or whatever it was. You could call that a failure. My business failed. It is no longer in existence. Or you could say I learned a ton about applying my college education to my own business. I learned a ton about marketing. I learned a ton about doing a business plan and understanding your audience, and understanding like let's just map this out in terms of the number of hours I have to work to earn $1. Like, there was so much education that happened with that. And I helped people. I genuinely helped people. There's no part of me that views that as a failure. The business no longer exists. I closed the business. It's a failure. So I think that I always was capable of understanding that if you extract some information out of a situation, you can utilize that to level yourself up.
That is such good advice in general. And I think there's probably a lot of people out there that appreciate that advice. I think it's just a really good mindset. Are you able to relate that to your racers as well? Because I think that, like you had mentioned, there are so many parallels between racing and business that I feel like that is because racing is tough, right? You a lot of times lose a lot more than you win, and it's really, really hard. But sharing those stories, I feel like it has to be impactful to the drivers, to the team, to everybody.
Yeah, so this particular year, we are running Sabra Cook and Porsche Carrera Cup North America. Kellymoss pulled together some resources to do a scholarship for a female driver. One of the things I'm incredibly passionate about, there's less than 3% representation of women in motorsports. We are over 50% of the population. This is an opportunity for the industry to have more drivers, more technicians. My gosh, I could just fill a world with technicians that I need. More truck drivers, more tire people, and more fans if we can increase that fan base. Sort of as a side note, I think that in order to increase the fan base, you have to tell more stories for women to be engaged. Men can geek on the statistics a little bit more than women, like the actual story, not drama, the story of the people. But so I put together this program, which I've been told is the largest program in North American history in terms of the size of the scope for a woman in motorsports. And so we're running Sabra Cook. Sabra, an amazing driver. She was the only female representation from the United States in the W Series, which was a women-only racing series that raced around Europe and typically would have a race in the United States, much like F1. So she was the woman that represented that. She had an injury. She was out of racing for a year. We did a driver shootout. She won the shootout. She's a driver. She really stepped into Porsche Carrera Cup North America, which is the highest level of single make racing that you can do in the United States in Porsche. I think that her expectation was that she'd really be, sort of at the top. That particular series has 20 really high-end pro drivers. It's insanely competitive. And I think that she would have been closer to the top in other years. But as it turns out, this year, there's a lot of incredible talent. After she got done with qualifying at Sebring, the first race of the year, she felt disappointed in where she had qualified. And in part, I'm sure, because she has a lot of pressure and a lot of eyes on her. She's the only woman to ever run in Porsche Carrera Cup North America. So she's the only one on track. She got out of the car and she was clearly disappointed. And I said, your job is not to win this race. Your job is to tell an honest story. What good does it do to the world to have somebody that's insanely talented pluck in and number one and just run with it? That is relatable to no one. Show your journey. I said your job is to never, ever, ever get out of the car and say something happened to me. Learn from every situation. If you get T-boned in a corner, many people, and we've had drivers like this, get out and go, it wasn't my fault and it wasn't fair. And no, did you not know your competition well enough to know how close you should place your car next to that driver? Did you go into the corner? Should you have been patient and waited until the exit of that corner instead of the entrance to try to get up that close? It's all on you always if you want to, take that power for yourself. So I said, you're never allowed to say anything happened to you on the track. Learn a little bit every single time. Get a little bit faster every single time. And I don't care where you are, you're going to be great with me. And she was so relieved. And now our ability to be able to tell that true story, it's tenacity. It's tenacity that makes you win, not some freakish inborn skill set that nobody else in the world has, right? And we want to tell that story. So I think it's incredible that people start to stop devaluing failure.
That is powerful. I mean, just the fact that, and she's got a huge following, right? She's got a huge following. She's got a great brand, and just I had the fortune of watching her in person once, and you're right. I mean, just insanely talented, and I think that coaching and that leadership applies to almost any business, right? To be able to go and talk to somebody about that. And, we see it with technicians all the time where we'll have a technician that fails at a job, or they do something where the job comes back and the quality of the work wasn't great. And then we'll have a manager go out and beat them up. Right. And they're, and my advice to a lot of managers and leaders in general is, they're already beating themselves up pretty bad, right? Like it's they're down in the dumps, and the last thing they need is for you to come pile onto that. Like your job is to coach them and lead them and encourage them so that they don't fall flat. Because if you go out and you just compound what they're already beating themselves up about, it's never going to turn out well.
Thanks for listening to Beyond the Wrench. We'd like to take a minute to talk about this week's sponsor, Jasper Engines and Transmissions. Okay, your customer's engine or transmission has failed, but now is not the time for them to trade in their vehicle, not without a working engine or transmission. Besides, would they have kept their vehicle another 3 to 5 years if their engine or transmission had not let them down? If you answered yes, then Jasper Engines and Transmissions is your choice to give your customer vehicles new life and many thousands of miles of enjoyable driving performance. When considering the high cost of a new or newer used vehicle, there's a pretty good case to be made for replacing a drivetrain component that has failed or is delivering poor performance. Rather than trading in their car, truck, van, or SUV, install a quality remanufactured Jasper product for less than your customer would have to invest in a new vehicle or a newer used vehicle. Check out their website at jasperengines.com to learn more about the money-saving value of Jasper.
Yeah, well, I think something super important as well is to change the way you view yourself from a manager to a coach. And just that simple, near synonym conversion is a mind shift change from how you view those situations. It's not my job to have expectation that you're perfect. It's my job to help you learn from your mistakes and get better. And I think that definitely, and in this industry, it's really hard too, because we are trying very hard to show the world that automotive is fun and it's exhilarating and it's exciting. And it's something that, you've got young people that go, I don't even want a car. I don't even want a car. I'm just going to take Uber. Why would I even have a car? So cars represented freedom and joy and all kinds of things to us. And it's very important for our future to focus on being able to have taproot moments and bring more kids into that, so that we bring more drivers and engineers and fans into not just motorsports, but automotive. Being able to develop patience and being able to diagnose problems and being able to understand patiently following checklists and being able to have confidence in what you do and pride in what you're accomplishing. All of those are things that are, they seem to be losing their value when you've got a generation of people that go, I want to be an influencer. What does that mean? You want to get on social media and have people pay you to have an opinion about something that you've had no life experience in, right? But this is what we're sort of battling. Everything is immediate, and everything is mildly superficial, and everything is cloaked with this lack of reality. And you're looking at everybody else's highlight reels saying my life doesn't have as much meaning, and getting kids to disconnect from what looks like life is and have real interactions with people and experience working hard and achieving things is so critically important, not just for our businesses, but fundamentally for the health of our world. We need more people to disengage and struggle and overcome and see how amazing that feels.
Amen. I don't have anything to add there, because I think it's so spot on. And as it relates to whether it's motorsports or automotive in general, having that next generation coming along is so important. And I think a lot of times, and I give you credit for recognizing that, because I think a lot of times it can become an afterthought, especially in the motorsports world, when you're dealing with the pressures of sponsorship. You're dealing with the pressures of running a profitable team. There's so many things involved with that. And for you to take a step back and say, okay, for the future here, we might need to do some things a little differently, or we need to encourage more young people to acknowledge that this is a pretty cool thing, and get to feel it and get to see it. And you had mentioned before the importance of getting more females involved in the industry. Why do you feel like that's so important? And I think that's probably a fairly rhetorical question. It seems really stupid that our industry, we're largely ignoring 50% of the population.
That's a big part.
But but like there's so much opportunity there. And I think when you talk about sharing those stories and getting more females into the industry, there's a lot of importance there. But what do you see with this? Do you think that we're making progress in terms of getting more exposure and getting more young ladies into motorsports or automotive, or somewhere in our industry, because we sorely need it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me, there's not men in automotive that go, we don't want women. Women are difficult to deal with. No, men, I mean, I'm sure that there are men that say, but I've not experienced that. I would say broadly, men are incredibly supportive of women in automotive. It doesn't dawn on men to invite their nieces to go karting. It doesn't dawn on men to encourage their daughters to come to the garage with them and work on the car and have that hugely bonding experience that many men in automotive had with their dad. It was the one time they came together and without words were able to successfully connect and communicate in previous generations. So fundamentally, the men are not recognizing this as an option because they've never seen it. This is not a sexism thing. This is a statistical thing. They've never seen it. It doesn't dawn on them. You've got your reticular activation system, which is how your brain sources information and determines what comes with the millions of pieces of information that come at you, what matters to you and comes into your actual vision. And when you don't ever see something, when you're not cognizant of it, when it's not in your awareness, it simply doesn't exist. And because we haven't seen women in motorsports, to be fair, women also are not recognizing this as an opportunity. So with Sabra and what we're doing with her, and she's also an engineer. I mean, she's whole package. She's brilliant.
Rock
she's
star.
Well-spoken. She's a generous human being. As a matter of fact, Prototech, which is located in Blue Mounds, not far from you, is one of her primary sponsors as well. Bless them. But with having the driver being the most visible part of the race team, we can make the most headway by investing in our driver. But she's inspiring girls in every area, including girls that are watching racing, and then this whole world opens up to them. So it's not about being anti-man. It's about being pro-woman. It's about an abundance mentality, not a scarcity mentality. So I don't want to take away anything from the males that are doing so well in this sport. I want to add to, and everybody lifts up, right? So I feel like the primary focus has to be awareness.
And the stories help with the awareness, right? That's what drives the awareness, and being able to tell some of these very cool stories that are out there. I think obviously very, very important. When you look at it, I think the same thing could be said for driving diversity in motorsports as well. And when I say that, motorsports it's expensive to race, right? And I think a lot of times there might be some kid out there that won't get exposure to it because they're not in a financial position to be able to get into a kart, or maybe a young adult that wants to get into a car and head to Road America, or something like that. Any advice on how a young person gets involved or starts to really get a feel for motorsports? Because I do think there's a hugely untapped market of people in that demographic as well, that might be a little bit more economically disadvantaged, but really have a passion for what this is, and a lot of times almost, I think, become discouraged when you see the dollar signs, right? So
Yeah.
curious if you see something similar and if there is opportunity in that demographic as well.
100%. And so for me, what an exciting time to be alive, right? We're sitting in a situation where in my youth, a very mindless, fun pastime would be playing Pac-Man, right? Nobody can find any particular value in me playing Pac-Man, right? It was a way to pass time. Now, gaming is an entirely different world. So in sim racing, which if you've got $300, you can be a sim racer. Colleges are having scholarships on sim racing. You can win significant purses in sim racing. We have an engineer here that not only is very successful in driving an open wheel Formula Ford and an engineer for us, but he's also nationally recognized as a sim racer.
Wow.
So it's not the same animal, but it is the most convertible animal that they have in gaming to real life. But you have an opportunity to learn tracks and understand and explore this passion in a very, very reasonable way. So that sort of knocks down a whole lot of barriers. Quite honestly, that wasn't even, even when COVID was happening, that's when all of this really started to explore, when nobody could get out onto the track. So again, what a time to be alive. You have this whole other world that's available to you. We are involved in that world. Again, meet people where they are. So I am told that if you take the viewership of F1, the NBA, and the NFL combined, that is the viewership, not the participation, the people that watch people game. Like, this is an enormous group of people. And so we did reach into where people are, and we had a women's sim worldwide competition that was called Screen to Speed, that we had we brought the top 15 drivers to Las Vegas and recorded a TV show where we did a shootout with the top 15 female drivers in Las Vegas. Again, those people that are struggling to have the budget for sim are not likely to be Kellymoss drivers. It is certainly possible, but the delta between the $350 pain point and the $1 million pain point is pretty significant in terms of getting into the racing. But for me, every time you can reach one more person where they are and help them understand what you're doing, for sure, we developed fans because of our involvement in that. And so there is the opportunity, and let's not underplay the value of getting a spec Miata and going out and actually learning wheel-to-wheel
Feeling
racing. Yeah.
I will say I've done iRacing. It's something I want to do more of, and maybe someday when life slows down, be able to do more of it. But it is hard. Like, it is not an easy thing to do, and I think if nothing else, it gives folks the perspective of how difficult it is to keep a car on the track, to to hit the apex correctly, to to do these different things, and how many talented people there are out there. Some of those gamers are insanely talented, and it's one of those things, like you said, I think COVID forced us to look at that maybe a little bit more. But
yeah.
I mean, I saw some of the purses for some of these online and specifically iRacing races, and they're winning significant money.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like it's nice purses.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a part of that too is all the timing and what happened with Drive to Survive. And hats off to the recognition of that and taking advantage of the timing in that. But for me, Drive to Survive showed that if you tell the story, that women will come. I mean, the number of F1 fans and the percentage that are women is crazy. Also, sort of selfishly, it showed how hard it is to run a race team. I mean, these people have millions and millions and millions of dollars, and every time somebody's car can't finish, it makes us look like rock stars. So that was helpful. They sort of show how hard it is to actually keep the car when you're putting that much pressure on the car. But it was great. 2 weeks ago, we ran with F1 in Miami. And again, speaking of the tenacity, Sabra started the race in qualifying in 18th position. Miami is a difficult track to pass at. Long Beach is the most difficult. I shouldn't say the worst. Get in trouble with somebody. Long Beach is the most difficult track to pass at. Miami also very difficult to pass at. She went from qualifying P18, position 18. She worked her way up to 6th position, being patient and looking for opportunities and making safe passes and just staying out of the stuff that's happening in front of her. She was able to do that. And ultimately, Kellymoss won, which was great. But there was 270,000 people watching that race. Showing tenacity, showing progress. Every time she's on track, she's a little bit better. Like, these are amazing life lessons.
It ties right back to that emotional maturity too, right? Being able to go through that experience and know that just because you are P18, that it's not going to be the end of the world. You can do some things to mix it up and get up there. And I think if you go into that mindset like, oh man, I sucked. Like I got, I'm back in the field. Like it's going to put me in a bad spot. Mm-hmm. It just sets you up for failure. And I think that's such a great comparison to life as a whole. And there's so many lessons in racing that I think that can be applied to business and to life as a whole. What do you see for the future of the sport? We've got a lot of the electric vehicle side coming. Mm-hmm. We see, a lot of changes in technology. How do you see the progression moving forward? Obviously, with what you're working with, high technology, a lot of things going on, but interested to hear what your thoughts are on the future of motorsports.
Sure. I think that all of the lessons that we've been talking about through all of this are incredibly applicable in business. Just fundamentally, Kellymoss went from a racing business to a racing and project build business, and COVID hit, and I said, we have this wealth of knowledge that's sitting at home right now, which are people that understand how to make you go faster on the racetrack. And I developed the Online Racing Academy, the driver development that we do, where you have 70 lessons that you can learn what your line should be, and how to pass and how to defend, and all of the things that we teach in the Driver Academy was an evolution of what's happening in the world and how do we adapt. Not just adapt, how do we capitalize? How do we get better because there's change? COVID happens and our business completely shut down. And I could have, it's not my fault. It's unfair. I can't go out to the track. If you behave that way, you lose opportunity. Our opportunity was to develop the most comprehensive online driver academy that's ever existed. And then again, with what we're doing with our membership as well, and letting people come in and sit and listen to the drivers and the engineers talking on track and all the different things that you get within our membership. And so things are going to always change and adapt. And I feel like if you're not afraid to fail, if you redefine how you fail and you look at every shift as an opportunity and you say, how can I capitalize on this? For us, when you look at all the electric stuff, so much of our focus, we have the race cars and we'll always be doing what's coming out new in the Porsche race cars. We're so committed to the brand. Our partnership with Porsche is incredibly strong. Most of our stuff is, the air-cooled the stuff that we're working on. We for sure do servicing of people's Porsches. It's a really small part of our business. For me, I'm going to skip the whole electric debate. Quite honestly, we'll adapt as we need to in the racing world. But for our shop here in Madison, Wisconsin, I'm going to ship that whole debate, and I'm watching what's happening with e-fuels. So we don't have the recycling problems. We don't have the infrastructure problems. We've got Porsche and places like Prometheus that are developing fuels where you can be a responsible citizen of the world and not have to change out the current car that you're driving. And so I'm putting my dollars on, not reinvesting and redoing everything we're doing in the shop to accommodate what very well may be a trend, and just watch the advancements that are happening just on the other side. So kind of a long answer to the question about what's happening in the future. I think as long as you don't have fear of taking action, take action, recognize you're going to misstep. I'm not scared to say I made a mistake. I'm proud to say I take action. So whatever I do, I'm going to learn from it. It'll be fine. I'm really happy to have another route besides investing a lot of money into something that I don't think that is going to bear the ROI that's necessary. But if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong, and that'll be fine too. So we just, you try to educate yourself, and you try to be fearless, and you try to recognize that you can't really misstep.
I think that fits in with everything that we've talked about, right? Is you're not afraid to be aggressive and move in a direction. And I do agree with you 100%, by the way. I think there's a lot of truth to what you just said there. But all in all, I can't tell you how much I respect you and how much I've enjoyed our conversation, the conversation we had previous to this. What you're doing is incredible. And again, the fact that it's in our backyard is pretty amazing. And I just wish you nothing but the best of luck moving forward. I think you're an incredible person and running an incredible business. And you've got a fan in me for life. I absolutely love what you guys do.
Yeah, well, I was, the same with you. I was so excited to learn that you're just right here. It's wonderful. And I'm absolutely certain we're going to have opportunities to find synergistic ways to work together, both being incredibly passionate about moving into tomorrow in a healthy way and helping our industries. I think that when you come from a position where it's about giving and trusting that success follows a genuine, authentic mindset about doing good things, then good things just always happen. So I really look forward to working with you in the future and helping each other out and having you bring those kids and do some touring of the shop and get them sitting in a race car.
I'll probably be the biggest kid of them all. So yes, we'll make that happen. But thank you so much for joining us today, Victoria. Appreciate your time and openness to talking about your growth mindset and just all the incredible things that you're doing.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That wraps up this week's episode of Beyond the Wrench. Be sure to tune in next week for another brand new episode. As a reminder, don't forget to rate and follow Beyond the Wrench on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps us get Beyond the Wrench in front of other fantastic shop owners, managers, technicians, and dealers just like you, so we can continue to help improve, promote, and grow this amazing industry. Thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week.